Think about the worst moment in your life, a situation so impactful that you aren't the same anymore. Now, imagine waking up in the morning and reliving that moment. By the end of the day, you feel exhausted and hope with your entire being that the next day will be different. But it's not, it's actually quite the same over and over again. Yet you don't give up. You fight with all your might to escape this mess. Days, months and years go by and nothing has changed. You are still in the same cycle of misery. The thing is that you have been so caught up in the daily struggle that you have lost the sense of time. It seems all your effort has gone to waste. It's like being in a quicksand. The harder you try to get out, the more you sink. Well, this is the depiction of hell according to the show Lucifer. Now, most of us were raised with a different idea that if you do bad things, you end up in hell and you get tortured for eternity. But I think this is not that scary because eventually you get used to it, right? Sure, it may take a few decades to get used to being burned to a crisp, but then you're like, you're using fire again? Come on man, that's boring. Can you at least change the form of punishment? The scariest thing about this depiction of hell is the simplicity. However, what I truly find unsettling is the depiction of hell in the show Lucifer. I mean, to relive the most painful moments of your life again and again, and no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to figure out how to get the fuck out, and the nail to the coffin is that deep, unending sense of hopelessness. I watched the show a few years ago and it had an impact because it closely resembled my life at the time. But after going through therapy and learning about psychology, I have realized that hell is real. But not in the supernatural sense, it's just that there are some psychological mechanisms that keep us trapped and suffering. And by understanding them, we can break free from these hell loops and prevent ourselves from getting trapped in the first place. Let's start by analyzing a powerful and sneaky trap: guilt. Lucifer is an angel who rebelled against God, and to punish him, God sent him to rule hell. He realizes his mistake but believes the punishment is unjust. To Lucifer, his actions were simply a quest for freedom and autonomy from his father's control. Now, despite being the king of hell, he's living in a place isolated from his loved ones. And interestingly, he's surrounded by tormented souls, whom, just like him, are trapped in their guilt. He yearned for the love and acceptance of his father and siblings, but this isolation reinforces his belief that he is unworthy of love, which is a huge issue he has to solve throughout the entire series. So basically, Lucifer is living in a place where he feels alone, rejected, and is surrounded by people who are just as lost as him. Then Lucifer, being the rebel he is, decides to leave hell and moves to LA to live among humans. It is a significant step forward because in this type of environment, it's difficult to live a normal life, let alone to reach your full potential. But the guilt is still within him, which drives him to constantly sabotage and punish himself. We'll talk more about it in the next chapter, but let's analyze this guilt mechanism and how it keeps us trapped. Guilt is a necessary emotion because it helps us make good choices in life. By feeling guilty when we make a mistake, we are more likely to be careful so we don't repeat it in the future. But it can also become a major obstacle in our life. According to a study by Nietzsche and Zeilenberg, excessive guilt makes us more likely to punish ourselves. We do this by denying ourselves a pleasurable activity or subjecting ourselves to a penalty. They suggest that we all have this deep belief instilled by society that if we feel guilty, then we deserve to be punished. This tendency is more pronounced when we make a mistake that cannot be fixed. like breaking a family heirloom, forgetting an important anniversary, or cheating. In such cases, there's no way to repair the harm done, but the guilt demands some form of relief, often through self-punishment. Now here's where it gets more interesting. Punishing ourselves doesn't actually lead to forgiving ourselves for making those mistakes. It doesn't help us move on. So we are more likely to continue punishing ourselves and suffer unnecessarily. Alright, now how can we deal with the guilt? How can we prevent it from making us sabotage ourselves? Let's start by recognizing the mechanism. We feel guilt. It manifests as something else like anxiety, insecurity, procrastination, or perfectionism. We avoid dealing with it. Instead, we try to distract ourselves with games, food, movies, cigarettes, alcohol, sex, whatever makes us feel comfortable for a while. Since we unconsciously believe that we deserve to be punished, we will do things that makes us feel bad or fail. As you can see, if we want to solve the problem, we don't have to deal with all this stuff. All we need to do is get to the root, which is the reason why we are feeling guilty. Now we have conscious guilt and unconscious guilt. Here we know why we are guilty. It's for something we have or haven't done. In this case, the solution is straightforward. Accept the responsibility and make amends. But we also have unconscious guilt. And this is when it gets murky because there are reasons we are not aware of and we need to work to uncover them. Now, from what I have noticed, there are two primary reasons why we feel guilty. There's probably more, but these are the ones I know. Often we feel guilty simply for thinking. I think something negative, I say to myself, "Oh, you shouldn't be thinking this, or that's awful. What if you act on it?" I fail to consider that humans have over 60,000 thoughts per day. And some of that is going to be negative stuff, but it doesn't mean I will act on it. So what I end up doing is avoid it, put it under the rug with other stuff that I hate thinking about. And as I said, I will try to distract myself. Sometimes we don't do things because they are fun, but because we simply want to distract ourselves. We can also feel guilty for something we have done in the past. Did you know that the unconscious mind doesn't have a sense of time? So if I made a mistake, let's say 20 years ago, and I didn't deal with it, that mistake can still haunt me to this day. What's more interesting is that we are probably making those mistakes seem worse than they actually were, because we attach emotions and judgments to that situation, so our memories of the past are not that accurate. In other words, you should never expect to remember the past exactly as it was. So identifying why you feel guilty can help you stop sabotaging yourself and move forward. And I know that doing this work alone might be very challenging. So if you feel overwhelmed, you might want to talk to an experienced psychologist. I know I have given this advice before, and I will give it again because the subjects I cover in this channel are a bit heavy, and for some people these videos might give them an understanding of their issues, but to solve them they need professional help. In addition, what has helped me a lot in dealing with guilt and other issues is the Nietzsche's perspective. He encouraged people to analyze and question all beliefs that lead us to feeling guilty or oppress ourselves. By doing so, you will be able to fully accept yourself. This means to accept that you have instincts, desires, negative thoughts, and imperfections. And there's no reason to feel guilty or ashamed for being a human. Now let's move on to another powerful psychological trap: self-fulfilling prophecies. Lucifer is very charming and fun to be around, but as we said, he's deeply hurt, isolated, and there's also this narrative that devil is evil and he's responsible for everything bad that happens in the world. He knows this is not true, and he's constantly telling people that it's not his fault.
I am responsible for a lot of things, Race, but not your soul, not your actions. You have to be. Otherwise.
But still, when everyone around you puts you into a certain category and treats you differently from what you really are, it creates an inner struggle. And Lucifer is constantly struggling with this misinterpretation people have about him, that he's inherently evil and monstrous. This increases his guilt and self-loathing, so he has created the devil face. The devil face is a symbol of self-punishment because it reminds him of the rebellion and all the things that followed. Every time he reveals the devil face, it reinforces his self-hatred. And it's also a way to keep people away from connecting with him, which makes him even more hurt. But the most important thing is that despite all of these obstacles, Lucifer is trying to get out of this mess. He moved out of hell, he tries to connect with 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 and the rest of the squad, he helps people, he goes to therapy even though he often misinterprets her advice.
Yet every time I think you come upon a moment of realization, you go the exact wrong direction with it.
Hold on, you're right. Damn, you're good.
Yep.
But what matters is that he's actively trying to get better, and eventually he does. Now I have prepared a simple mind map to explain the mechanism of self-fulfilling prophecies. It all starts with the misinterpretation of reality. At this phase, we accept information about ourselves or the world that is not true, or we don't understand it correctly. Another issue I have noticed is that we try to find the meaning, some explanation on why we have this problem or on why we are suffering. And usually we search for these reasons everywhere but within. Maybe we are right, maybe others are to blame, but does it help us move forward? No. Then you form irrational beliefs about yourself or the problem you are facing. You take action to solve this problem, but you are in a very disadvantageous situation because you are not thinking clearly. Obviously, in that case, we will fail. It's that good old principle at play: if you don't understand the problem, you can't solve the problem. Now you have two choices. The first choice is to reflect and do a cold analysis of the situation. You might think something like, what I have been doing so far clearly hasn't been working. So I have to completely change my approach. I must at least listen to people who have overcome same challenges. Or what's even better, I must find someone who is an actual expert to help me. So you reflect on your situation and change your strategy. The second choice we have is to refuse accepting reality. When we fail, we tend to blame others or victimize ourselves, which reinforces the misinterpretation of reality or the illusion. We also might rationalize our mistakes in the past. This is very interesting. Once you become aware that for many years you had a distorted perception of reality, and you see that your own persistence in this view has caused you a lot of pain, you refuse to admit it. You tell yourself, no, there's no way I could have been so stupid. So instead of reflecting, we try to justify our mistakes even though deep down we know it's a lie. Then we stop facing uncomfortable situations that are necessary for our growth, and we don't look as a possibility a different image about ourselves. And basically, we continue to stay into this vicious cycle. So when we don't reflect and accept responsibility for our own behavior, then we end up looking at these failures as proof that we are incapable of changing or achieving our goals. In other words, by refusing to admit that you wasted a lot of time and suffered for nothing, you continue to burn even more time and suffer even more unnecessarily. When we are here, what are we doing? we are misinterpreting reality, right? So we are back to where we started, and we will continue to stay in this cycle. But if we make the first choice, we will move to the next step, which is reevaluating our beliefs. If you have been struggling to solve a big problem in your life for a long time, or if you are suffering a lot, then you need to reevaluate your beliefs. Of course, this is not easy because it's a belief. We tend to not question our beliefs and even avoid the people who might oppose them. But that's exactly what we should be doing. We should seek experts, people who are actually good at their job, to help us understand what's real. For example, I was trying to lose some extra weight and I started running a lot and eating much less. And I did lose a lot of weight fast, but I was feeling miserable. Then I was like, this is not sustainable, I need to change something. I went on YouTube and found some pretty good advice. I listened to them, did some research myself, and I went for it. Long story short, I asked the gym instructor to help me build muscle because I wanted to increase the metabolic rate. I followed his program. I increased the food intake gradually, and I got rid of the habit of using food to cope with emotions. And I've got very good results. I don't have to be a treadmill rabbit anymore. Apparently there's a term for what I was doing. And most importantly, I don't have to diet because dieting fucking sucks. So basically I had a wrong belief system about food and exercise which was holding me back. But by changing it, I solved my problem. Another interesting character in the show is Amenediel. He is the strongest angel and God's favorite son. He would always obey his orders and believed without a shadow of doubt in the God's plan. Everything he does is to maintain this perfect image. Then God tells him to go to LA and persuade Lucifer to go back to ruling hell. What started as a simple task for Amenediel basically broke him as a man. How did this happen? As we said, Lucifer had gone to live with humans and was finally feeling liked, respect, and also fell in love with 𝗖𝗵. So why would he go back to hell, right? But Amenediel was so determined to fulfill his duty that he never considered what Lucifer really wanted. And of course he failed to convince him. As he failed again and again to reason with Lucifer, he started using manipulation and deceit to get what he wants. Things that he probably never did before. Eventually, this minor deviation from his normal self, or what you would call following the approach of "and justifies the means," this approach ended up causing the deaths of innocent people. So the greatest angel, the God's favorite son, had blood in his hands. Consequently, after he realized what he has done, he started drowning on guilt. He started having doubts in himself because he disappointed God, and his wings started to fall. Just like with Lucifer, who has the devil face, with Amenediel, losing the wings is a result of feeling very guilty. So basically, he lost the greatest thing he was proud of, himself. Now, his storyline is very similar to a lot of people. And again, I will use a mind map to explain the mechanism. You connect your self-image with what other people expect of you. And when you fail to maintain these usually unreasonable standards, then you overly criticize yourself, you start pushing yourself harder, you try to do more for these people, you rationalize extreme efforts, you adopt a mindset that achieving their goals is more important than your own goals or well-being. And after you have done all this work for them, you must get something in return, right? What is your price? Well, since there's a huge gap between these unreasonable standards and your actions, then you will be constantly anxious and stressed, and you will feel guilty because you believe you're not doing enough. Eventually, you end up in a place where you don't recognize yourself anymore, and you might get stuck in this cycle for a long time. However, there's a silver lining. It doesn't have to be worse from here on. Of course, when you lose yourself, you feel like shit, and as we have explained before, you become an easy prey to unscrupulous people. But it can also make you reevaluate all of your beliefs, and you can change for the better. It can be a massively useful tool for personal growth. Here's why. If you have reflected on your actions as we talked about earlier, you have more perspective. You have a bigger understanding of how things work. So when people stress themselves out for minor issues, you don't. You know that most issues in our everyday lives are not a cause for concern. So you become wise and resilient, which will be beneficial for the rest of your life. Now let's make a quick summary of how you can get out of hell. You need to actively seek the truth and understand the exact problem you're facing. This means taking a step back and analyzing the situation objectively. So putting in effort is important, but it's not enough. Without a clear understanding of your issue, you might be putting all of that effort in the wrong direction. That's why I have emphasized to study your problem and seek advice from people who are actual experts in that subject. Then we have the most important element in getting out of hell: facing reality. Once you understand what you are truly up against, you need to face it head-on. And you cannot take half measures. You either do what it takes or you don't. For example, in the show there's only one character that was able to get out of hell: Lee Garner. Lee is a low-level criminal who always gets into debts and resorts to crime to pay them off. After he ends up in hell, Lucifer tells him that the souls are not forced to stay there, but are trapped by their guilt and inability to forgive themselves. So the only way to get out of the loop is to face his guilt. Lee had disappointed his family so often that he completely distanced himself from them, believing he would only continue to let them down. This guilt weighed heavily on him, preventing from finding peace even in death.
My mom, she got sick right after it. She died. My dad followed right after. This was my last chance, and I didn't go inside.
Eventually, he decides to confront the guilt head-on and enters inside the family home. A symbolic act of facing his deepest fears and regrets. That's when he ascends to heaven.